What's up everybody, my name's TJ. This is my 93 Honda Civic Del Sol SI behind me. It's running off a set of carburetors from a first generation Kawasaki Ninja street bike. I get a lot of questions about this setup every time I post about it online, so I figured I'd make a video showing it all in a little bit more depth, more than I can fit in a 90-second video on Instagram Reels. Anyway, let's go take a look at it. That's the part everybody wants to see right there. That's a set of four 37mm vacuum slide carburetors. They are off of a first generation Kawasaki ZZR 600, known in the US as the Ninja. I actually don't know a whole lot about the bike they came off of. I'm not a bike guy. I'm just going off of what the company I bought them from told me. It's the same company that made that manifold. But we'll get to all this stuff under the hood here later. I'm going to start from the back and work our way back up past all the less interesting stuff first. So we're starting here in the back. Battery is in the trunk. It doesn't really have to be in the trunk for this setup. I just wanted that space where the factory battery goes to mount other stuff. So it's an Odyssey PC680 Extreme. If that battery looks a little small to you, that's why. It does work fine for in a car. I think they're meant for like side-by-sides or watercraft or something like that. It's just picked a smaller one to save space. I don't need a whole lot of capacity. The downside of those batteries is you don't want to ever let them die, because if they die once, they're kind of dead forever. Ask me how I know. I did it. This is the second one of those batteries because I forgot to shut off the cutoff switch. That's the main power feed for everything that runs the engine right there. It's just a regular battery relocation kit. I think that was from Flaming River is where I bought that from. And then you just have a two-position on-off battery switch. The big one obviously runs the heavy stuff like the starter, and the smaller one runs a lot of the ancillary stuff, the controls that we're going to see later inside the car that are running the whole show here. So they go up forward and they go through, I guess you'd consider it a firewall in the rear of the car there. And they come up to the back here behind the passenger seat. That little compartment is gone, and the wires just run up through there into where the fuse box is. But that, in the meantime, that's the fuel pump. The factory fuel pump on these is like 45, 55 PSI or something like that. And the carburetors really only need like 3 to 5 PSI. So there's a couple different ways you can accomplish that. You cannot just regulate 55 PSI down to 5 because you'll burn up the pump. I just went with a low pressure pump. It's an Edelbrock, what's the model number? 17301. It's nominally 4 to 7 PSI. And it seems to be providing a pretty steady 5 in this setup. This was originally just going to be a temporary pump because everybody says those pumps suck and they don't last very long. But it's been on here a couple years now. When it craps out, I'll put a little bit more higher end pump and regulator setup in there. But I mean, this thing's just been chugging along for a good couple of years now, so it's doing its job. Moving up here into what used to be the little center compartment. This is the fuse panel for everything that pertains to the car now. So everything wired through there, and I still have a little room to expand to add other things. Fuel pump, all accessories, ignition, instruments, all that kind of stuff, all comes through here. Again, I'm not running any ECU or anything, so everything that makes the engine run passes through there, and the factory fuse panel is still in there. It still exists just for stuff like headlights and all that kind of stuff that was not controlled by the ECU. Moving forward, this is where the key is to start the car. I left the keys in the back. So you're not going to start the car without that. You do have to put something in there to start it, a regular key. And then up here, where my radio was, this is all the switches to start it. Okay, so here's the key to start the car. You turn it on, and then up here we have a few different switches. This one is for the two-step. We'll get to that. That's not really necessary to start it. That's just kind of for fun. Accessory, that would be for the radio, the windows, power locks, all that kind of stuff. So we do turn that on every time you turn it on, because the circuit that provides the reference voltage to make the alternator charge was also on the key. So I just tied it into the accessory circuit because that was easiest to do at the time. Next one powers up the dash. That's all the gauges. They are glow shift gauges. I know people kind of like to shit on glow shift gauges. That one's AEM. But I've used them in a couple other cars before, and I've had them running for years, and they've always been fine. We get fuel, RPM, obviously. The speedometer. The speedometer is run by GPS, so there's a little GPS transponder up there, because I really have no way to pick up a signal from the factory speed sensor anymore, because that runs through the ECU. And then obviously coolant temperature there, and I do have my wideband that I was using to tune it. It kind of doesn't need to be there anymore, but to be honest with you, I put a couple holes in the dash to mount it, so it's there forever now. Then the next one, that'd be the fuel pump. That's manually toggled there, and then you do have to provide power for the ignition box. Here's a manual choke if you need it. It's warm, so we shouldn't now, and then we'll just start it. And it pops right on. Right, like I said, it's warm right now. I drove it before, but that's how that works. Now you're probably wondering, what about a radio? I do still have a radio, if you heard that little ding sound before. This is a Bluetooth only. It's by Jordan Distributors, JDI. It's called a Ghost Box. It's Bluetooth only, and it essentially just makes the car like a giant Bluetooth, like JBL speaker. And so I do still have a regular radio using the regular speakers. It's just controlled through my phone. Like, the whole car is just a big Bluetooth speaker now. And while we're over here, this is where the ECU would be if I had one. There's the plugs for it. I left them there just to show that, yeah, it's not there. I didn't tuck it or hide it or anything. That's just dead wires now. So moving forward up here, we're back at those carburetors. I got this whole setup. I shouldn't say the whole setup. I got the carbs and the intake manifold and the boots from a place in the UK. It's called Danced Performance, or maybe it's Dan ST Performance. I'm not really sure how they pronounce it. But they make that manifold, and that's really the linchpin to this whole thing. This doesn't really happen without a manifold, and I lack the ability to weld up something like that. So it bolts straight onto the cylinder head, and then you just bolt the carbs right on with those little rubber boots, and that's all that's holding it on. In order to get the throttle cable to work, is actually able to use the factory throttle cable with very little modification. It's just going to be kind of hard to show because where it's packaged here. So the end of the factory throttle cable hooks into the throttle input on those carbs. And the only thing I really had to do was the factory cable pulls left to right. Now I needed to pull down in order to turn the carbs. So I just rerouted that cable. I'm just going to sneak the phone back in here and see if we can show you. It is routed down, and what I did was, let's see if I can see here. So that's the throttle cable right there. It's going down. I just extended this stud from the cylinder head, just extended it with a bit of all thread, and then you can see the original hanger. I just drilled out one of the holes, and it's hooked on there. So that pulls straight up and down, and the throttle works, but that little bracket would tilt back and forth. So you'll see I have a little turnbuckle hooked from there to here, where I extended this other one, and that turnbuckle puts tension on the original mount and just holds it steady so it doesn't rock back and forth when you hit the gas. And then this red plate is here to keep the turnbuckle from pulling those two studs in close to each other. It just acts as a spacer. So it's not a super elegant setup, but it works, and it was really, really easy to adapt and didn't require a whole lot of special parts. They had some special parts that are meant for the throttle cable in the box, but I'll be damned if I could figure out what the hell I was supposed to do with the little pieces and parts that they threw in there, and they didn't connect to anything as far as I can see. This is the cable for the choke. It's a manual choke. Really, you only need it when it's cold. This car sits all week, so usually the first time I start it up, when I take it out on the weekend, I'll choke it, and then the rest of the day it still is warm enough where it usually just kicks right on without needing that. Going over here, fuel's coming out of the factory fuel line and just goes into this really simple regulator. Most of the big regulators on the market, I found that I tried several. They don't work super well at low pressure like this. So this is just a real simple mechanical one that goes from 1 to 5. I have it all the way up at 5 now, and then I just have these two input and output gauges just so I can monitor it. I haven't made any changes to it in a long time, so they really probably don't need strictly to be there, but they're still there. And then it just goes fuel right up underneath into the carb. Here's that main power wire coming out into a box here. There's a terminal bus. That's a negative one, so that's why it can stay exposed. It's the ground terminal. The positive one's in this little weatherproof box underneath here, and that's where we draw all our power taps from. I still have a bunch of empty ones, so I can run other stuff to it too. Main power just goes straight to the starter, and then we're good. We're running from there. My ignition is done by this MSD box, the Digital 6AL. I really could have just done a regular Digital 6, but I wanted to be able to add the two-step onto there. It doesn't have to be there. It's really unnecessary, but it was cheap relatively, and it was easy to wire up. So now I have two-step on this car, and I could use for launch control. It's just on a switch now. I'll wire it to a button on the shifter or something at some point in the future, but it's really not super important right now. MSD Blaster SS coil instead of the factory coil. Really, you could probably figure out a way to make the factory coil work if you wanted to, but it's much simpler to use the MSD coil with the MSD ignition. In order to get a clean signal for the MSD ignition, I can't use the regular one that people would use. Normally the ignition signal comes from the ECU, and as you saw, it's gone now. So I had to pull it from this one little signal wire on the distributor. All of on these engines, if you don't already know, the crank position sensor, the cylinder top dead center sensor, all that kind of stuff is actually all contained within the distributor for whatever reason. There's no sensor on the crank over there or anything like that. So the only way to get a clean signal, you would think to use like the top dead center sensor or something like that, but it doesn't really. You can make the car start and run like that, but it runs really, really awkwardly. You would set the timing, and then you would watch with the timing light, and the timing would jump back and forth because it wasn't a consistent signal. The only consistent signal that comes out of there is something that's just labeled on the wiring diagrams as the cylinder sensor. To be completely honest with you, I don't know what the hell that sensor is originally intended to do, but it's there, and it provides a steady signal that doesn't jump around. The problem is that it provides it way out of time normally. So what you have to do in order to do that, and I found this out thanks to some dude from like a 12-year-old post on an Australian Honda forum, is you need way more mechanical advance than is normally available in there. So we cut that. It's something like 30 degrees of advance mechanically, but that puts me at, I think, 16 degrees, which is the normal recommended. Yeah, so right there, 16 degrees before top dead center. So that's optimal, like your normal timing. It's still the exact same normal timing. One day I'll build another distributor, and I'll take and have somebody weld me up an extended loop around there, just so it's not quite so jank like that, but it's been running like that for a while. If you're familiar with like doing engine swaps on these with like an OBD2 engine to an OBD1 car, a lot of people will do cuts like that on the OBD1 distributor just to bolt it into there so they can plug it back into the rest of the car. Excel plug wires, and then just regular old plugs. Don't need anything fancy there. The MSD just says to use regular, I think it was like copper core plugs, which is exactly what I did. What else do we have under here? That reminds me, the engine itself is obviously, if you know anything about these, is not the original engine. A 93 would have had a D16 Z6. When I bought it, it had this engine in it. It was sold to the guy as a ZC engine. It's not. It is D16A. So when I say that, people usually say D16A what? Just D16A. This particular engine was never actually sold in the US. It was just sold in one Civic derivative in Japan called the Honda Domani, and they're pretty neat. They're actually available with all-wheel drive. It's pretty much a D16 Y8. It is an OBD2 engine. As far as I could tell by referencing the head code, it's a D16 Y8 head. It does use the older, like the oil pan gasket. You can't use a D16 Y8 oil pan gasket. It has to be an older model oil pan gasket, so I don't know if it's like a Z6 block with a Y8 head. Not 100% sure. One day I'll take it apart when we do the rest of the build, and we'll get some measurements on it. We'll know a little bit more about these, but there's not a whole lot about this particular one just because they're only imported and people weren't exactly asking for them, so you don't see them a whole lot. So it's neat that it's just a purely JDM engine, but it's really nothing that special. Getting back in the electrical side of things, VTEC was one thing people told me, you're not going to have VTEC now. VTEC was actually pretty easy to get working. This is an RPM activated switch. These are used by a lot of drag racers to trigger your nitrous. So you just set at a particular RPM and it will trigger whatever you have hooked up to it. So it sets off this relay, and that relay sets off that the VTEC solenoid at the normal, I think it was 4,800 RPM. That's when that kicks on, and it works. I still have full VTEC. Another concern people have was that you're not going to be able to adjust the fuel curve when the VTEC kicks in, but it works fine because it's a vacuum slide carburetor. So the more RPM the engine's producing, the more it's sucking in, the more the valve, the float lifts, and the more fuel it puts in the engine. So I do have with that wideband in there, I can tell it stays stoichiometric or better all through the RPM range as you're accelerating. So that hasn't been a problem at all. For my coolant sensor, I'm not using a factory one because they have weird thread patterns on them. I broke my heater core when I was putting in the polyurethane motor mounts, so it doesn't work anyway. So this is just looped where the heater core was, and there's my coolant temperature sensor for that. And then I have a catch can. Obviously there's no PCV system or anything anymore, so the valve cover and where the old PCV came out of the block just go in there. I haven't drained it in a while, and it's probably got some stuff in it, but that's a task for another day. And if you're wondering why the transmission's gold, I rebuilt the transmission. When I got it, the guy had like 75, 90 weight gear oil in there. If you know anything about these, the factory spec was 10W30 motor oil. So the bearings were trashed in it. So I did a full rebuild. I put a M Factory limited slip diff in it, and I was bored, so I painted the entire transmission gold. When I do the rest of the engine build, when I take it out, it's gonna do a high compression build with a hot cam in there, and that's it. I'll probably paint that gold too, just for the hell of it. But that is pretty much it. That's everything you need to run one of these off of there. This did take me a couple of months of doing it on weekends to figure everything out, but it is in a state where it's working now. I've been driving this car for close to 2 years now with this setup on it, and it hasn't given me really any trouble at all. It's still a perfectly streetable car. This is just some shitty eBay exhaust. I've got a new exhaust manifold on the way. It was on there when I bought it, and it has a really crap eBay catback on it. It doesn't sound that bad, to be completely honest with you, but it's not good quality and it's leaking. But that's pretty much the whole overview of getting this car to run like that. Next thing, I guess, is going to be just take it for a drive on the street. That's one thing people always said, when I talked about doing this. Oh, it's not going to be streetable anymore. You're not going to have a throttle response. It's going to be down on power. And it is absolutely not. So we're going to show you how exactly that works, how it performs on the road here in just a second. So how does it drive on the street, you ask? The answer is normal. It drives pretty normal. A couple other people have driven it. My parents have both driven it. And everybody agrees that it's a perfectly normal, streetable car. The gas mileage went down, obviously, but that's okay because it's not a commuter car. It's just a regular old weekend beater. So the throttle response is the same. I think a lot of people were concerned that the Carbs would have worse throttle response, but it takes off just fine. Another thing was power. Is it down on power? No. I mean, it's a naturally aspirated D-series, so it's not a fast car no matter what you do. But it's every bit as fast as it was when it was still fuel injected. So I don't have any concerns about the performance of it. I don't think I lost anything except maybe a little bit of gas mileage. So let's take off here. So as you can see, it drives fine. I don't have any problem driving around. I take it around the weekends. I go out to lunch. I do errands. I go to the gun range and stuff. Drive it all over town. If I didn't tell you that I had done this carb conversion, I don't think you'd be able to tell, aside from the fact that I have a weird startup procedure for it and not an ignition key. But it's a pretty usable, streetable car still. Eventually, it's going to go to autocross and stuff like that. But right now, it does everything you want it to do, and I haven't really sacrificed anything for this, I don't feel. It's not giving me a bunch of hassle. I don't have to do constant tuning to the carbs. I think that's a lot of people's perception of carburetors. But once I got the mixture set up when I first did this, it was fine ever since. And I haven't touched it. I haven't even had to balance them again. I check them every now and again, but it's been fine. It hasn't needed any extra attention in terms of the carburetors themselves. Everything has been perfectly normal and perfectly drivable as long as I don't kill the battery by leaving it on for a week. It's you just hop in it and go. And when it's cold, when it's been sitting for a week, you have to choke it and you have to let it sit and idle for 60 seconds or so before it's really up to snuff. But other than that, it's a regular car. It's not something I would recommend doing to your daily because it is a pain in the ass to do it to get it set up in the first place, and it does cost you probably about 20 to 30% drop in fuel mileage, which is perfectly okay with me because this car didn't really get bad gas mileage to start with. It's a 1.6 liter. so it's not killing me. I still don't put gas in it, but like once a month maybe I put fuel stabilizer in it because I go through so little gas with it. I don't really have any complaints. As you can see, I'm just driving through the regular neighborhood here, and it's not giving me any trouble. It's not giving me any guff. Right now, at low speed cruise, it's a little bit rich. That's probably why you get such bad gas mileage out of it, but that's not the end of the world. When it's idling, it idles at about 14.7 stoichiometric, and as you get on it, it stays about there, or it creeps up to like 13 or 12 to 1, which is pretty much ideal. As you get higher in the RPM range, it goes a smidgen rich, and that's it. And that's pretty much what you would want out of a fuel curve on a car like this. So I'm pretty happy with it overall. It's not a solution to a problem or anything like that. Whoop. It's not going to, if you're having issues with your ECU or whatever, I don't know that this is the route you take to fix it. But if you're looking to do something different on there, yeah, it's definitely an option. I talked about the two-step, but I didn't show it in action. I think I have it set at 2,500 RPM. You can get a little pop out of it. Or a big pop. I found some shift knobs that have a toggle button on them, and I'll probably put one of those on there so I can use it for when I take it to just to launch at like autocross and stuff like that. But for right now, it's just there to make noise and piss off the neighbors. So some frequently asked questions here. The first one obviously is why? Why did you do this? And what really sparked me to do it was having a ton of electrical gremlins within like 6 months after I got it. And I think it's the fault of the guy who did the swap, although the swap was kind of a hack job. But that's all straightened out now, but the ECU went out, just some of the capacitors popped on it, and it was just dead. So I got a refurbished ECU. That one was bad. Sent it back, got another refurbished ECU. That one was bad. Sent it back and got another one, so it's at 3 or 4 ECUs I went through. And then the car was running again. Obviously the main relay went out several times. It's a 90s Honda. That's how it goes on these, if you know these. Then just sensors would go bad. I replaced every sensor on that original manifold. Fast idle thermal valve, idle air control valve, throttle position sensor, everything, you name it. So it was always just chasing electrical gremlins with the car. And I was just thinking, man, it sure would be nice if I didn't have to deal with all the electrical stuff. It would be nice, if I had an older car or just a carburetor, man, I could tune it with a screwdriver. So it just sort of was like an idle thought as I just started looking around online. I found there were people that were running these engines on like dual Webers. And so that was originally what I was going to do. And then I stumbled on that Dance Performance company. They're based out of the UK. So if you're in America and you haven't heard of them, that's probably why I hadn't either. I just found them Googling around. And I guess that's a more common thing over there. But they make this setup and use bike carbs. And bike carbs are sort of a more modern carburetor compared to Webers. I mean, modern 4 carbs anyway. So that's an interesting idea. I'll do that. And I started looking around for information on how to do it, and there's basically none. Nobody does these. So there wasn't really a whole lot to go off of except for like 1 or 2 people who were working on like the old D series from like the 80s that came with a factory like single barrel carb on them. Other than that, there's not really a whole lot of knowledge on it. And the kit and everything was like $1,000. So I just kind of took the risk and jumped in knowing full well I might ruin the car and never actually get it to work again. And after months of working on weekends and a lot of times scratching my head and doing things wrong and thinking that it wasn't ever going to work, eventually it got to the point where it's working like it is now. Slowly at first, but now I've been driving it like this for 2 years, I guess, or so, and it's been fine. Other thing people want to know is how much does it cost altogether. I think it's probably around like $3,000 in that whole system to get everything going, just pertaining to making it run with the carbs. The carbs and the manifold, and it came with like an air filter and a couple of ancillary crap that I didn't use. That was like $1,000 plus shipping, a couple $100 worth of ignition here, a couple $100 worth of electronics and stuff there, all the little bits and bobs, all the little pieces of wire and connectors and things that I had to bend up. I think I'm probably at close to $3,000 getting it done. So it's not a cheap thing. It's not something you should, like I said before, it's not something you should do on your daily. I certainly wouldn't recommend just doing it for fun. If you're looking to do something different that's cool and kind of like a naturally aspirated, and you're not looking to make huge power, I think it's totally an option for that kind of thing. Other thing I get a lot is, well, why didn't you just do something else? Why didn't you just K-swap it? Why didn't you just do a Haltech ECU? And the answer is I didn't want to. I know those things are better in terms of making power. I shouldn't even do better. They are better in terms of making power and simplicity maybe in the long run. But I wanted to do something different. I always kind of thought it would be cool to run one of these later model cars, I mean later models, 30 years old, to run something like this off of carburetors, like the older stuff. I came up working on older stuff. My dad was always a muscle car guy. And that's just kind of the stuff that I was used to. So I thought, man, it would be neat to have something like that in one of these Hondas that I really like. So that's why I did it. And every time I posted, well, you could have just built a K-swap for that. I didn't want to do a K-swap. Everybody does a K-swap. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's not what I want to do. I want to do something different. I don't want to make 400 horsepower. I don't really think I need to. I just wanted to have a fun car just to bop around with on the weekend, take it out to autocross a little bit, and just kind of fun to mess with. So what are the future plans? Mostly, in terms of performance, we're pretty close to being there. I do want to do a high compression build, looking at like the P28 pistons and stuff like that. The easy way to do it, I want to hit somewhere around like 11:1 compression, and then do like a stage 1 or stage 2 or level 1, level 2 cam. Maybe send that one off, get it reground or something like that. I would like to see maybe 140, 150 horsepower of the wheels, and that would be the highest I would even bother to go with it. And I would be happy with that. Otherwise, we're just doing regular stuff. Obviously, it needs paint. The paint's real bad. When I bought it, it had a plastic dip job on it, and not a very good one. They did a real bad job, and they sanded it before they put the plastic dip on for whatever godforsaken reason. So it needs paint. It needs a little body work here and there. It does have coilovers on it, and I want to do a little bit more with the suspension and control arms, give it a little more adjustability there. Reading the interior, it's a little bit tired. It's not in bad shape considering the age of the car. But as far as like performance stuff, the transmission's already all you can want. It's got a stage 1 XD clutch in it and a lightweight flywheel from Competition Clutch. So I don't need like 140, 150 horsepower would be that's pretty good for a D series if I could hit that, and I'd be happy with that, and I would just keep it there and just drive it. So if you got this far, thanks for watching. I think I went over everything that's all like the major points of it. But if you have any other questions, let me know. A lot of people have expressed interest in this since I've posted it. I've been going around saying that it's the only one, that I'm the only person running this setup on this engine, at least in the US, and nobody has corrected me yet. So if you're doing it too, let me know. I'd love to compare notes. And if you're interested in doing it too, because I have had people say they're interested, but I don't really have anything to show them because there's no write-ups or anything on this. Let me know. I can't walk you through the whole thing because I had to figure it out on my own, and your situation may be a little bit different. But if you have any questions, if you're working on this or something similar, if you're doing a similar type of conversion to another car, let me know. I'll help you out as I can. I'm not an expert by any means. I did used to work on cars for a living. That was a long time ago, and it's something I decided I like better as a hobby than a profession. So I don't do it professionally and haven't for a long time. I just goof around with engines, small engine stuff. This a little bit with more modern stuff. This is the 1.4 turbo. These cars actually, it's a Chevy Cruze. These are shit. Don't buy one of these. But if you do, I know a lot about those too now from having to replace everything on that one. But that's it. So I think I'm going to upload more updates on this car to this channel as I go on, and other stuff I work on. Like I said, I do mini bikes, I do firearms. I know YouTube doesn't like that a whole lot, but we'll see. I don't know. I've never had a YouTube channel before, so I'll put what I put when I put it. This is not something that I'm going to do full time or anything, but if you're interested, yeah, go ahead and subscribe, and maybe one day there'll be another video. I can't promise you anything, to be frank, but we'll see. So yeah, like I said, let me know if you have any questions or anything. I'll be happy to answer. And if there's anything I left out, I don't think I did, but knowing me, it's entirely possible. And yeah, so that's it. That's the ZZR 600 carb conversion on the 93 Del Sol. Thanks everybody. Have a good one.